So thou, O son of man, I have set thee a watchman unto the house of Israel. Therefore thou shalt hear the word of my mouth, and warn them from me.
Have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather expose them.
Coming to you from an undisclosed location in Middle Tennessee and examining current events from a biblical perspective, this is Bible News Radio with your hosts, Randall and Stacy Harp.
Okay, hey everybody. I want to welcome you to this edition of Bible News Radio. Tonight you can hear the music, can't you? Anyway, I want to thank you guys for coming in. Whatever platform you're on, thank you for being on it. And don't forget, you can subscribe on wherever you're at. If you're on Facebook, you can subscribe there. If you're on Periscope, you can subscribe there. And if you're on YouTube, you can totally subscribe there as well. And I want to welcome all you guys out here in Periscope. I can see Melanie and Mia and Jeff and Dorothy and Liz. Actually, Mia's not in there, but Mia, you're on the replay, right? Hey, Mia. Me and the bear match. Okay, so here's the deal, you guys. You guys know that in Christianity, our roots happen to be Jewish, right? And as you know, if you've been with me for the last 6 months or whatever, I was on my journey to find out how Jewish I am. And it turns out I actually am a little bit genetically. Apparently I have some mannerisms and curly hair. Apparently that counts, but who knew? Except a lot of Jewish people that told me that. Anyway, we have a wonderful guest on tonight. It's Messianic teacher. Not Messiah. He's not the Messiah. He's a Messianic teacher. Mottel Baleston, who actually, this is his third time on the show. The first time we had him on to kind of give the overview about Ariel Ministries and some of the Messianic work that he's done. And last time we talked about Hanukkah, we learned a whole lot. That was totally cool. And tonight we're going to talk about the Feast of Purim, which is going to be even cooler in my opinion. So you guys share this out and get your Bibles out. I think you might have to open up to a book in the Old Testament. Esther, I think. Is that right? All right. Well, it's in the Old Testament, people. All right. Don't forget also that you can go over to my Twitter account. And my Twitter account, you can click on that pinned tweet and download Ariel Ministries Bible Study of the Month, which has to do with prophecy and the modern state of Israel. Check that out and do that. And also don't forget, go over to BibleNewsRadio.com, join my email list. If you're not on there, you're missing a lot of good stuff. Join that list so you'll get notified every day, and you'll get like the replay in it tomorrow and a whole bunch of other stuff. So today we all found out, if you watch the news, that Billy Graham graduated. You know? And yeah, I have to tell you, it's really interesting to me, my emotive reaction to it, because I was like, I actually got all emotional. I did. I was like, what? Why am I all emotional? But I think it's because of a couple of reasons. And maybe you guys, you can put a 1 or something in the chat box. You can talk about how you felt when you heard the news. Because, not everybody loved Billy Graham. There were a lot of haters out there. I mean, there were some people who, like to judge people and, all that. In fact, if you go over to Twitter, they actually have as one of the hashtags Billy Graham hell. Okay, so I'm just saying there was a lot of haters of Billy Graham, but I think there's even more lovers of Billy Graham. And I think it's interesting to me that the Drudge Report, which is owned by Matt Drudge, who is an avowed homosexual and he's conservative, he highlighted Billy Graham's death with talking about the gospel going across the whole world. And you can't get any better than that. I remember my dad, my dad's 89, and I gave him the book Billy Graham and Me, which was written a couple of years back. Because actually, I think it was in the last 6 or 7 years, Billy Graham has been marketed all these different books, about the end of his life. And he actually had a desire. He wanted to live to be in 100, and everybody was hoping he would make it. But, well, God had a different plan, and so that's okay. But my dad, he read that book, Billy Graham and Me, and was just telling me, like, how great Billy Graham was and everything. And I was like, Dad, you're talking to me. I have no idea really who this guy is. And I don't know how many of you are my age. I'm almost 50, but here's the thing. Look, Billy Graham is 99. That's like almost 50 years older than me, okay? So he isn't from my generation. His kid, Franklin Graham, is, who's actually old enough to be my dad. Franklin Graham's barely old enough to be my dad. So the thing is, to me, Billy Graham didn't impact me personally like a lot of other people. And it's interesting because as a media person today, all day, my email has been, I've been getting press releases from all the, Christian celebrities and, media outlets talking about Billy Graham and all this other stuff. So I thought I would have Mottel here, who's just a little teeny wee bit older than me, talk about, his experience or thoughts about Billy Graham, because he's just a little bit older and probably has more knowledge about Billy Graham than I do. So welcome back to the show.
I'm glad to be here.
Well, I'm glad you're here. So what did you think of Billy Graham?
Oh, I have a very positive view of Billy Graham as both an evangelist and as a man. Mm-hmm. It's interesting that you should say your experience with him. Growing up as a kid, we grew up in the day when it was a bonanza of television. We had a whole 5 channels. So I mean, not we had 5 channels in New York City. And I can remember on WPIX Channel 11, in glorious black and white, they would televise the Billy Graham Crusades. This was because we had a black and white television. We did not have a color television. So this was in the early 60s. And I could remember my father, who at that point is a Jewish man who is quite a skeptic, still holding on to a lot of socialist ideas. He really admired Billy Graham for being a very straightforward, straight shooter, and sticking to the Bible. So even though my father would not go on to make a profession until about 2 years after I did, my father came to faith about 2 years after I came to faith at age 21. Still, my father had a very positive view of Billy Graham. And I think that was probably a factor 30 years later that made him willing to consider this evangelical spiel, this evangelical gospel, because it had been so well represented by a man like Billy Graham. So he had a very positive sort of view in our home. He had made a couple of controversial statements over the years. It didn't go over well with some in the Jewish community. But I think in later years, he corrected those. And he eventually came forward as a consistent friend of Israel. And so all of those things are very positive.
Very cool. Yeah, I've always seen him as a positive person, a positive figure, but I've never, but like I said, he's not my generation. And yes. but my dad, when he was reading that book, Billy Graham and Me, which by the way I highly recommend, it's basically a compilation of stories of people who were impacted or met Billy Graham personally, and they, sure. They had that. My dad was just like amazed at him. I was at pickleball this morning, and one of my pickleball friends who was in Desert Storm actually told me that he met Billy Graham in 1991 when he was in Desert Storm. So there, I'm sure, are a gazillion stories out there. The closest I ever got to meeting Billy Graham was actually meeting his daughter, Anne Graham Lotz, who I met, it has to be probably 7 or 8 years ago now, because it was in California when I met her. But yeah, I mean, she's she's
quite a preacher.
She is. She preaches well, and she's got that, and then of course Franklin. And he's really more I guess my evangelist would be Greg Laurie, because I grew up in California and the Harvest Crusades were all that. But
I don't know if you saw a few hours ago, Greg Laurie actually put out a video tribute to Billy Graham live from Israel.
oh, I didn't know.
And it was actually extremely well done. I'm not very familiar with Greg Laurie. Of course, I've seen his name online, but if I saw it pop up in a Facebook feed where Greg Laurie just got out on the balcony of a house there in Jerusalem, perhaps a hotel, and they did a live feed of him just spontaneously. It wasn't scripted. With Jerusalem in the background, he gave a tribute and mentioned that he is actually a board member of the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association,
Oh, cool.
and that he had traveled with Billy Graham, that they had consulted, and he gave lots of specifics and lots of examples, very warm memories of maybe 20, 25 years ago when he was involved with some of the Billy Graham Crusades. And that was a very well done thing. I just saw it a few hours ago.
Yeah, Melanie in our chat room actually said she saw part of it too. So I'm going to have to go look for it and watch it later, because I was doing stuff today. I missed it, darn it, but that's okay. Okay, so everybody, you guys remember Mottel from before. And last time you were here, we talked about Hanukkah. And
Yes.
and I actually have to tell you something. I was playing pickleball not too long ago, and a new lady came to the game. And I was sitting there. We started talking about stuff, and found out that she's Jewish. And I told her, I said, "Well, I'm part Jewish." And of course, she's like, "You are." I go like, "Are you Orthodox? What are you?" I'm like, "Well," I said, "Well, I'm Messianic." Anyway, the funny thing is that she knew about Jews for Jesus, but she didn't know about Ariel. And anyway, I told her about you, how we had just had you on the show, and I talked about how we wouldn't have Christmas if it wasn't for Hanukkah, and all that. And it was a really cool opening to talk about the Bible and stuff. That was very cool. So I just wanted to let you know that actually happened. And yeah, anyway.
Good.
So tell us about Purim, though, okay? Or let's wait before we do that. Tell everybody a little bit more about you in case we got somebody new, which I'm sure we do, actually.
Sure. Well, my name is Mottel Baleston. That's my real name. The name Mottel is a very traditional Jewish name. The only other time that almost anyone would have heard it is in the play or the movie Fiddler on the Roof. He is the young man who marries the oldest daughter of Tevye the milkman. Of course, the famous story of Fiddler on the Roof, where Tevye has 5 daughters, count them, 5, and because he's very poor and can't really afford a dowry, he is despairing of a good match for his daughters. And so he wanted to marry her off to a very wealthy older widower in town. That wasn't her idea. She wanted to marry a boy her own age, who she genuinely loved, whose name was Mottel. He was a poor tailor. And of course, it's the drama and it's the musical, and eventually they marry. But Mottel is a name that was common in Eastern European Jewish circles. I, growing up, did not realize how common it was in Europe before the Holocaust. But it was a very common name at that time. So I grew up in an average, typical Jewish home in New York City. I was born in Brooklyn Jewish Hospital, and during the Eisenhower administration. Don't need to get any more specific than that. And during that time, it was a very simple given that nice Jewish boys from Brooklyn did not believe in Jesus as the Messiah. And of course, as soon as you're told not to do something, I was told not to read the New Testament. That's the first thing you want to understand. What's so forbidden? So when I read the New Testament and opened up to the first page of the New Testament, I went to the Brooklyn Public Library and got a complete Bible. And the first sentence in the so-called Christian Bible that I read was, these are the generations, this is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. So in this first sentence of the so-called Christian Bible, all three characters that you're introduced to are all Jewish. And as I continue to read this book of Matthew, the first book of the New Testament, I was reading the story of a Jewish man by the name of Yosef, who was engaged to a nice Jewish girl by the name of Miriam. It's a very Jewish story. And she announces the improbable one day, that she is of child by the Ruach HaKodesh, the Hebrew word for the Holy Spirit. And of course, he recognized after the Lord kind of hit him upside the head, that this was of God. And so she gave birth, Miriam gave birth to a child whose name was Yeshua. This was the one who was revealed to be the Messiah. So he was Messiah Yeshua, was born into a Jewish village by the name of Bethlehem, of a Jewish virgin by the name of Miriam, in the Jewish province of Judea. It was a Jewish province in the land of Israel. And so as I read the book of Matthew, it was a very Jewish story. Then later in the book of Matthew, it concludes by saying that the gospel, this good news of the arrival of the Messiah, is now going to go out to all of the nations of the world, and that non-Jews as well will have the opportunity to come to faith in Jesus. And so it's a beautiful story, and it's my story because he's my Messiah. And so I proudly and happily identify as a Jewish man who believes in Jesus, the Jewish Messiah. And as a result of that, I have brothers and sisters of every tongue, every stripe, black, white, Chinese, Asian. These are all my brothers and sisters in the Messiah. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
There you go. Well, including me, who's part Jewish. But
Okay.
as you said, I don't really qualify that much to get into the temple. I'll never forget that.
No, that 1% is not going to get you very far down the road. But work it,
Hey, I am, man, just so you know. Okay, so when we talked last, you gave us the history of Hanukkah. So let's talk about the Feast of Purim, because like right now, everybody, I think Ash Wednesday just passed or something, and anyway, we're looking forward to Palm Sunday, Good Friday, and then Resurrection Sunday.
Sure.
So how does Purim lead up to all of that, or does it have anything to do with it?
It has a lot to do with it.
Okay, good.
Let's pull back for a second and look at the entire forest before we focus in on this one tree.
Okay.
In the book of Leviticus, God gives to the nation of Israel a calendar. It's God's idea. The calendar that Israel has, that basic calendar, is God's idea. It wasn't a Jewish invention. So it's in Leviticus chapter 23. And in Leviticus 23, you'll have all 7 of the appointed feasts of the Lord. The first one is in the spring. It's the Feast of Passover. Then you have the Feast of Unleavened Bread. The Feast of First Fruits is the third one. The fourth one is the Feast of Weeks. In the fall, you have the Feast of Trumpets. The sixth holy day is the day of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And the seventh and final feast in the middle of the fall is the Feast of Tabernacles, Sukkot, or Sukkot, as my father used to say. And so those are the 7 feasts that God gave to Israel. It's his decision. Now, in addition to those 7 biblically appointed feasts, those 7 God-ordained feasts, the Jewish people over the years picked up a couple of other holidays that by the time of the new, because those original 7 were given in the book of Leviticus. So we're talking around the year 1300 BC, time of Moses. So around 1,350 or so years BC. Fast forward, about almost about 800 years, And you've now had a number of world empires that have come and gone. Egypt is the first famous Gentile world empire. And we all know about Egypt because that's the story of the Exodus.
Right.
So Egypt is the first great world power. Egypt rises to its heights of power. Then they persecute the Jews, and then they fall. Second world power is Assyria. It rises to the heights of power. It persecutes and enslaves the Jews. It falls. The third world power is Babylon. It rises, conquers Israel and Judea, takes the Jews into captivity, 70 years of Babylonian captivity, and then they are defeated around the year 536 by a conglomerate empire called the Medes and Persians. So the story of Purim is in this time period. The fourth great world power, the Medes and Persians, are in control. Now here's the central part of the story. The Babylonians, when they took people captive, they literally took them captive. That's why we have in the Psalms, by the rivers of Babylon, we played our harp and we wept when we remembered Zion. How can we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? They were captives in Babylon. However, when the Medes and Persians came in and destroyed the Babylonian kingdom, everyone was startled when the Medes and Persians basically stood up, made an announcement, got on their megaphone and said, hey, we're nice guys. We're not like the Babylonians. All you Jews, you are free to go home. It's there, it's to the west. Find a camel, start walking, however you want to go home, you're free to go home. So this is, again, around the year 530 BC. However, by that time, the Jewish people had been in Babylon for 2 generations. They had established homes. They had at least one day off, because that's how they were sitting by the rivers of Babylon and playing their harps, because apparently they had a single day off. So they were able to build businesses. They were able to cultivate fields, even while as indentured servants. That's what they were. So a lot of Jewish people looked at each other and said, go home. We are home. The Euphrates River Valley is our home. We've been here for 2 generations. It's like people who came here as young children, then they had children. Those children know no other country other than their new country. So a lot of the Jewish people said to themselves, we don't want to go back to Israel. It's in ruins. We would have to start all over again. We want to remain here in this nice area of Shushan in Persia. And that's the story of 2 Jews by the name of Mordechai and his young cousin Esther. And that brings us to the book of Esther, which is not very well known.
Really?
How many people read the book of Esther?
I love the book of Esther.
Good for you.
I have read it, like, I don't know how many times, but I've read it. I've studied it. It's one of my favorite books ever.
It's a very important book.
I remember, though, when I was first a Christian, and this is a true story, because the woman, she was 23. I was 14, so, just saying. Her grandmother was named Esther, and I thought, ooh, what a weird name that is. I did. I thought that was just a weird name. And then, anyway, long story short, my first discipler, I guess, Barbara, she said, do you know what Esther is or who she was? And I'm like, nope. I have no idea. I just became a Christian. Anyway, so she told me. And anyway, and now one of my best friends, her daughter's name is Esther, and she's like 15 or 16 now, I think, something like that. And so it's not a very common name today, but back then, isn't the Hebrew Hadassah?
Actually, there are 2 different names.
Okay.
Her Hebrew name is Hadassah, and Hadassah is like a myrtle branch, sort of. It's literally a branch from a tree. But Hadassah and Esther are 2 completely different words. Hadassah is the Hebrew. Esther Don't want to give anyone, a problem with this, but it's actually a pagan name.
Mm-hmm.
It comes from the goddess over there in Persia of Ishtar.
Okay.
So no, they're two completely different names, but basically the Book of Esther has their Persian names. So Esther was her Persian name. Hadassah is her Hebrew name. We have the same deal with Daniel and his three buddies there, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Everyone remembers their pagan names, but their Hebrew names are in the text once, and then that's it. Or actually, it's in twice. But people simply call them by the most common name. It's like a lot of people here in America. You may meet a Jewish fellow, and his name is Charlie. Well, that's not really a Jewish name.
Right.
But if you go into synagogue with him one day, and he's called up for an aliyah, he's called up to read the Torah, he'll be called Chaim, because that's his Hebrew name.
Gotcha.
It's not that Chaim is the Hebrew version of Charlie. It isn't. But you have two separate names. Same thing with Paul. There's a common misconception in evangelical circles that Paul, obviously he was Saul, but when and this is how people pejoratively put it, they'll say, oh, then he converted and became Paul. No, the reality is he continues to call himself Saul and Paul alternatively. So
True.
Sometimes he's Saul, sometimes he's Paul. The text goes back and forth one to the other because he had both names. In Roman society, the name Paulus would have been his name. In Hebrew society, when he went to the Jewish community, he didn't call himself Paul. He called himself Shaul, Saul.
Yeah.
And so he continued to have both names.
Okay. So earlier you said that Mordecai and Esther were cousins. I thought that Mordecai was her uncle.
The word used is a little bit, it's kind of hard to determine if it specifically means cousin or means uncle.
Okay. Because
the words back then in Hebrew are different than it's very simple. Now, modern day Hebrew, if you say, Dode, it's uncle.
Okay.
But back in those days, we don't have too many examples. And so there is actual textual question in the text. That's a very small issue. But the bottom line is he's bringing up Esther, who is probably a teenage girl at this point, and they are kind of undercover. They're not high profile as Jews. If you read a lot of modern Jewish commentary, and I read, every week I get 3 or 4 emails on the Parsha B'Shavua, which is the liturgical portion of the week, and they'll have a commentary on that. When Esther rolls around, I already know that there's going to be all sorts of commentary, especially by feminists, who look at Esther and they don't see a hero. This is not a heroine to them, because in essence, she did not value her identity until the very end of the story, seemingly. She was willing to throw off any sort of biblical identity, any sort of moral identity, put on the slinkiest outfit, and go and try to charm the king so that she's like the trophy wife on the king's arm. Yeah. And so it's not it's not the sort of example that really we want to uphold. And only in recent years has the Jewish community actually said that honestly. It used to be she was the heroine because of what she does at the end of the story. Right. But in the beginning of the story, she's not a person you want to emulate, because she was just all about fashion. She was like, gossip magazines and celebrity websites. That's what she was about. And cosmetics.
Well, and it's interesting because the Book of Esther is a very colorful book in many ways.
Yes.
And I'm curious, those of you who are in our live audience right now, put a 1 in the chat room if you've read the Book of Esther and you know what the Book of Esther is about. Because I'm just kind of curious how many of you do know what it's about. I'm going to assume some of you do, but you never know. So there's some newbies, new believers there. Okay, so it looks like It looks like we're getting all ones. Okay, good. See, so this is very cool then. So go ahead. So Mordecai, Esther.
So back to the story. You have
back to the story.
So the year is about 480 BC.
Okay.
So about 480 years before Jesus would be born. The Medes and Persians are in charge, and some Jews say, "Okay, we're going to make the long trek across the desert. We're going to schlep, get on donkeys, get on animals, and go across the deserts." Half of the Jews said, "You're crazy. There's nothing back in Israel. You'll have to start all over again. Here you have wonderful lives." Mordecai and Esther decided not to leave. So in another sense, they really aren't people to be emulated, because what God was about to do was back in the land of Israel. So the story that takes place in Esther is kind of a side story, because it concerns the Jewish people who perhaps they didn't have the best set of priorities. They didn't want to go back to Israel. So in short, here is the basic narration. You have this evil king by the name of Achashverosh, is his Hebrew name. Xerxes is the name that comes across in Greek. And he's sitting on the throne, and he's not a very intelligent fellow. He's kind of vain, and he's very prideful. And so he's got a wife by the name of Vashti, and he wants to impress all of his buddies. So he sets up a drinking party. He sets up a banquet. The banquet did not last one day. It didn't last 2 days. The banquet lasted 6 months.
Wow.
So he brings in all of his buddies and cronies to demonstrate that he was wealthy, that he had all of these palaces. And it takes weeks for people to travel someplace. So he figures once he has them there, he's going to have them there for 6 months. They have party after party, banquet after banquet, and he has the bright idea that he's going to have his wife put on her slinkiest outfit and dance for everyone. And she says, "No way I'm going to do that. I know my rights. This is wrong. I'm not going to do it." And all of a sudden, someone whispers in the king's ear, "Everyone is watching you now because they see that your wife just embarrassed you. If you don't do anything and just let this slide, all of the other ladies in the kingdom will think that they can disobey what their husbands ask." And of course, this is the Middle East in the year 400 BC. It's a very patriarchal society. I'm not giving an okay to that. I'm just reflecting what the text says.
Right.
The Bible oftentimes will report the dumb deeds of sinful people. There's a lot of dumb stuff that is recorded in here, but the Bible says, don't do this. It's really dumb. So the example that we have from King Achashverosh or King Xerxes, that's not a good thing. That's a bad thing. But the text accurately records it. So now she's out of a job. She's banished to the edge of the kingdom, and he holds a beauty contest to select a new queen. There are no questions on history in the contest. There's no, in this context, they're not told, how can you bring world peace? No, it's the only part of the contest is the bathing suit component.
Right.
And young Esther goes there. She makes the first cut, apparently. Then she gets, the beauty treatments and the spa treatments, and then she goes for the final selection, and she's in. She's now the queen, long story short. And so, at this point, Mordecai is very happy because he has his niece, his cousin, in the king's palace. So apparently they would talk through the window occasionally, and as he's hanging around the palace, waiting to talk to her, he overhears a plot by some of the king's associates. They're plotting to overthrow King Achashverosh. Mordecai, sneaks around, hears this, pulls out his cell phone, records it, whatever he does, and then takes that information and brings it to an aide of the king. The king checks it out. It's all true. There was a plot to assassinate him. The plotters are grabbed And the king is very happy about this. And so as the story goes on, it says that one day, king couldn't sleep, and he says, oh, read me the history of my administration over the last year. And when they get to the point of this failed plot and that the plotters were executed, he says to his right-hand man, to the prime minister, a man by the name of Haman, who was a very evil individual, he says to him, oh, Mr. Haman, you've been so helpful. Now, this fellow Mordecai, who helped to turn in the traitors, what was ever done for him? And, Haman is thinking, well, nothing was ever done. And so the king now wants to honor Mordecai. Now, the side story is that Haman has decided he doesn't like the Jews. He has decided that he wants to kill all the Jews. Think about this for a second. Here's where the theology of Jesus comes in. Mm-hmm. We don't know where the ancestors of Mary, the mother of Jesus, we don't know where they were. But at this point, about half the Jews in the world are living there in Persia, which is modern-day combination of Iran and Iraq. It's both countries, modern-day Persia. Eventually, it only became Iran. So half the Jews in the world, so there's a 50% chance that the ancestors of Mary were living there in Persia. Mary would eventually give birth to the Savior. Right. What diabolical character does not want Jesus to be born? And that person is Satan.
Right.
So in Satan's mind, he's thinking, if I can just cut off the Jewish people and kill them and cut off the line of the Messiah, I'll never have to deal with Jesus. His heel won't come down on my head. I won't be cast into the lake of fire if I can just kill those Jews. And that's why you see so much anti-Semitism against the Jewish people. It's basically a tool that Satan has used through history. So the story of Purim is basically of Satan using this evil character by the name of Haman. And by the way, whenever you recite the story in the synagogue, and they'll read the story in Hebrew, they'll use like a noisemaker like this. So if you see this noisemaker, and there it is, you see little images of Haman, and there's the king, okay? And so there's Haman and the king, and one's leading the other. So whenever the name of Haman is sounded, people will go like this. It's a noisemaker. Here is another noisemaker. And this says, I don't know, it's reversed here on your screen, but it says Haman. And so when Haman is announced in the text, people will go. So that makes it drowns out his name. So they'll read the text, they'll read the story, and whenever this evil Haman is mentioned, there's an attempt to drown out his name. Why? Because he was plotting to kill the Jews. But all of a sudden, Mordecai, one of the most prominent Jews, has now ingratiated himself to the king. And every time Haman passes, people are supposed to bow down and worship him, but except Mordecai won't do it. So Haman is now plotting against Mordecai, and Mordecai is standing firm. And the end of the story, well, kind of the end of the story, is simply that Haman is trying to hatch a plot. By the way, there are people who say, that how can the Bible, the Bible is not a usual document, it has no humor. One of the most humorous stories in the entire Bible takes place in the book of Esther.
That's right.
Because at this point, Haman is like in overdrive. He's like, his ears are red. He's like, the old cartoon with steam coming out of your ears. He's so mad at Mordecai. He's plotting against him. And finally, the king says to Haman, there's a man I would like to honor. And I would really want to make sure everyone who sees this man realizes the king is honoring. Now, Haman, in his grandiose self-view, in his elevated view, he said, oh, the king must be talking about me. the king must want to honor me. And so when the king says, how should we honor that person? At that point, Haman lays it on thick. He says, oh, well, you should dress him in the most magnificent royal robes. You should array him in the finest jewelry, put him on the royal horse, and have one of your dignitaries parade him around town. And the king says, excellent idea. Why don't you go do that for Mordecai right now?
Yep.
And of course, Haman is now pulling out his hair because that's the last thing in the world he wanted. So
Right.
you have this wonderful story that recurs in the Bible and in post-biblical Jewish history of some evil character plotting against the Jewish people, thinking that they are going to once and for all destroy the Jewish people, but God taking a hold of the facts, changing them around 180 degrees, reversing the situation. It happened with Hanukkah, as we discussed a couple of months ago, when God basically had raised up a group of individuals known as the Maccabees. Just at the point where it looked like all Israel was going to be annihilated, God raised up the Maccabees. Just when it looked as though all the Jews in Babylon, 50% of the Jews in the world, would be killed, God raises up Mordecai and Esther. And so finally, when Haman works his plan and says to the king, there's someone who's plotting against you. And the phrase in the text is very, very telling, because it's kind of like an ominous movie. Like you can hear the villain music in the background, like dun, 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 dun. And here's the phrase that Haman says. Haman says, there is a certain people, their customs and their ways are different from all of our ways, so we should annihilate them. And basically, this has been Satan's line since time immemorial. He has basically said, oh, the Jewish people are different, so you want to annihilate them. Among people who claim to be Christians, who still harbor irrational anti-Semitism, you still will hear these echoes. Even earlier today, I saw a comment made by a person who's an evangelical believer, who's not Jewish, a very disparaging comment about Jewish people. I'm just kind of been doing a little bit of a boil about it for the last couple of hours. And it's a person who should know better. But they made a very disparaging comment based on this whole idea of, well, you Jews are very different. You're not like us. And that was Haman, this evil tool of Satan. That was his pitch to the king. So you should issue a decree that they can all be killed. The king is tricked into issuing the decree. And a date is set, the 14th day of the month of Adar, when all the Jewish people are going to be killed. And basically their enemies will be able to take up swords against them. And so what happens into that, Mordecai goes to his niece Esther and says, a horrible plot has been determined upon our people. On this day in the month of Adar, all of the king's forces will come against us. Anyone who wants to try to kill us can attempt to kill us. And Esther, you are in the king's palace. You are his wife. You have not even told him that you are a Jew. And the most dramatic, emotional moment of the entire book is when Mordecai says to Esther, and who knows if you have not been born for such a time as this. Esther's entire place was for that moment where she could go to the king uninvited, which was a federal crime,
Right.
and say, an evil plot has been determined against my people to destroy us. And the king receives her, and he's shocked. He wants to do something. What is the plot? What happened? And she points dramatically across the room, and she says, it's that evil man, that Haman. He has tried to destroy our people, and he's plotting to kill us all on this certain date. And the king is angry. He storms up and he leaves the room. And immediately Haman rushes over to Esther. He falls at her feet. He grabs her feet and says, please, please do something. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. As he's grabbing her around her legs. The king comes back into the room, sees Haman grabbing his young wife's legs, immediately calls in the guards and says, away with him. And so the very gallows, the hangman's noose that Haman had built for Mordecai, that ultimately was used for Haman and his sons. The Jewish people were allowed to defend themselves. And the word Purim, by the way, where's this word coming from? The word Purim, the word Pur means casting of the lots, because literally dice were cast to determine the date on which the slaughter could occur. And so they threw the Purim, they threw the dice. Ultimately, what Satan meant for evil, God turned to good. So it's a very, very dramatic biblical story. Once again, in the connection with Jesus, it's entirely possible and perhaps likely that the ancestors of Miriam, the mother of Jesus, were residing there in Shushan, Persia, and would have been killed had this plot of Satan been allowed to go through.
Yeah, well, see, everybody, that's why you tune in to Bible News Radio, don't you? Yeah, I could listen to you all day, just so you know.
I got good material. I've got good material.
I know. It's just the story of Esther, though. The book of Esther is it's one of my favorite, and in particular because of everything you just said. But my nickname for Haman is Hangman. That's what whenever I read his name, that's what I always think is Hangman, because I always think, yeah, you know what? God has a way, and I think it's in Psalms or maybe Proverbs, I don't remember, but it always talks about David prayed that the evil would fall into their own pit, and I think that this is a perfect example of this. And yet, the tie-in to Mary, I never actually thought of that. My mom's name was Mary, and so I just kind of see that interesting connection there with that. But we are getting so close to the end of the hour. We gotta give a shout out to Ariel Ministries, of course. Sure. You guys don't know about Ariel. That's our sponsor, and you can go to ariel.org and use the coupon code Bible News to save 20% on anything there in the store. In fact, if you go over to the website ariel.org and go up to the search box and type in the Feast of Purim, and that's Purim, Feast of Purim. If you type that in, you're going to find a couple of things there. You'll find a PDF, you'll find an MP3, and something else. It's like $3 for the Bible study, and we're actually going to be talking about this I think in next week, actually. But if you go in there and you do that and you buy the the $3 one, you can use Bible News and save 20% on that. It won't even cost you $3. And if you like what Mottel just did, he will go ahead and, it'll be awesome. You'll just learn so much more. Don't forget, there is the Pillars of Our Community. You can become a pillar of our community by going to BibleNewsRadio.com/give and just sign up to donate every month, and we put you into a Facebook group where we can talk to you more, share fun stuff with you. Most of you in here are already in the pillars of the community, so you guys know already how much we appreciate you, and thank you for that. And then also don't forget about Camp Shoshana. That's actually the summer camp that Ariel does, that Mottel here, he actually teaches at it. So do you want to talk about that now? I'm
ready now.
Okay, so he's going to tell you a little bit about camp, because he's taught at it for like 15 years, you guys. And there's a lot. If you love this, oh my gosh, I just want to go there to meet him. So, yeah, go ahead and tell us about it.
I am, if anyone has appreciated some of the teaching I've done on these 3 programs with you, they need to understand that I am a product of Camp Shoshana. I first went to camp in 1980. Okay, so that's a good number of years ago. So I first started learning there in 1980 when I was just about 3 years old. No, I guess I was a little older, but we won't specify. So I was there as a student. Now, you have to understand, I was brand new, intending to go into full-time ministry, coming out of the dental field. I was making crowns and bridges for a number of years. But in 1980, I had this wonderful experience of going into the northern Adirondack Mountains in New York State to a ramshackle old broken down camp, which is what it was in 1980, called Camp Shoshana. Although the camp itself back then, 35 some years ago, was relatively primitive, the teaching was top-notch. It was kind of in between what you would get at Bible camp and what you would get at seminary, kind of in the middle of that. All of the teachers, just about all of them, were Jewish believers in Messiah Jesus. And of course, the founder of the camp and our ministries, the lead teacher, is Dr. Arnold Fruchtenbaum. And Arnold is a phenomenon. We're not told to be at the feet of any man. We're at the feet of Messiah Jesus. But Arnold has spent many hours at the feet of Messiah Jesus. And so when Arnold speaks, the Bible really comes alive. And so Arnold is a character. Arnold was born in the middle of the Holocaust. His family were Holocaust survivors. So he was born in the midst of World War II in Siberia, of all places, where his family were refugees of the war. And his father was a son of one of the chief Hasidic rabbis of the day. So Arnold's grandfather was one of the chief rabbis of the Gera Hasidim, one of the Hasidic sects in Europe that still exists to this very day. But World War II threw everything up in the air, and everything came down different. So Arnold's father, while obviously continued to be Jewish, was not so orthodox. He was able to get the family out of there safely. Eventually, they were able to come to the United States around 1951. And so Arnold became a believer in his early teen years. He was very studious. Just to compress all of this, he eventually started a discipleship camp for Jewish believers. And I actually had gone for 1 week back in '78, and my wife had also gone at about that same time. But the discipleship camp is an intensive Bible immersion program. So that's what Camp Shoshana is. Camp Shoshana is 5.5 hours a day of total Bible immersion by some of the top Messianic teachers, literally in the world. This summer we have Dr. Roger Libby. He's a Jewish believer from Switzerland who is an expert on biblical archaeology in the temple. So you're having seminary level teachers who you're hanging out with. And there's Dr. Libby. He's just the first person over from the left. There's my smiling Punim there in the middle, and Dr. Fruchtenbaum on the left, Rich Hill on the right. Those are the 4 teachers coming up for the summer of 2018. So Camp Shoshana runs from the second week of July through mid-August. It's a total of 6 weeks. If you only have 1 week, just go for 1 week. That's fine. You can select a week where you'll get complete classes. Other classes run for 2 weeks. You can go as little as 1 week, as long as 6 weeks. There's 3.5 hours of Bible instruction in the morning for newcomers. If this is your second year or more, then you don't have to, then it's just 2 hours. And then there's 2 hours in the evening. So you have 3 hours in the morning, then there's lunch. Right on the premises, we have a brand new state-of-the-art dining hall, air-conditioned, beautiful cafeteria, state-of-the-art, all that sort of thing. And then you have your entire afternoon free. There's recreation. You're in the middle of the forest. We have our own lake. You can go splashing around. You can swim. There's horseback riding in an adjacent, there's a farm down the road that offers that. You can take the ferry to Burlington, Vermont, and be back in time for supper. So there's lots of different activities, or you can just fellowship and hang out and play the guitar and sun on the beach. It's a wonderful set of fellowship, and there's literally people from all over the world. I believe last summer of 2017, we had 12 different countries represented. And while initially many years ago it was only open to Jewish believers, there's our lake and there's our new dock, it has now been open to everyone with a sincere interest. And so This is the place where I have learned most of my Bible. Now, I went to Bible college. I had one wonderful year of seminary, but I learned far, far more at Camp Shoshana in those intensive summers. So I'm a graduate of the 5-year program. If you go for 5 years, each summer, there is a differing set of courses. So if you go to the website that was just shown, campshoshana.org, you'll see the entire list of the curriculum. It's a total 5-year curriculum. Each summer, Life of Messiah is offered, but over a total of 5 years, you'll get all of the classes, and you'll get world-class Bible scholars like Dr. Arnold Fruchtenbaum teaching. It's a very relaxed place. We have a lot of fun. It's very informal. It's literally people from all over the world, people of all different stripes and all different denominations. You have people there who are charismatic, people who are not charismatic, people from denominational churches and people from house churches. We're all united around one central theme, and that is that the Word of God is the authoritative, inspired Word, and it is instruction to us. It's a lamp onto our pathway, and that's what we're there for. Totally, people need to check that out, and if not for this summer, then for next.
Yeah, I'm telling you guys, I went to Arnold Fruchtenbaum's Life of the Messiah teaching when he was giving it at I think in San Diego. He came down to a church and did just that for like a week, and that changed my life. I mean, literally, it changed my whole understanding of the Bible, because because it's like, just look at it this way, people. It's like, when you understand the context in which the scripture was written, it's kind of like putting a secret decoder ring over the text, because it makes more sense. You're like, oh my gosh, there it is. And it really, I mean, for me, so I just have one question. Can you bring animals up to camp? No? Just curious.
Yeah, well, it's mostly 3/4 no. Here's how that works. If someone really wants to bring a doggy up to camp, the only real way to do that is to stay in a motel in town. That would be the only way. Or I guess there are some people who do pull RVs up there or drive RVs up there, and then they have their little doggy in the RV. Gotcha. So that's the limitation. So it would need to stay in the hotel or in the RV. And I know people who do that. Mm-hmm. They get a motel. The motel is about 15 minutes away, and they'll go immediately after lunch. They go to the motel, walk the dog, do whatever they need to do, and then they come back in time for dinner. So all of your meals are taken right there. We have breakfast, beautiful breakfast on the premises. Again, I'm going on and on about the wonderful cafeteria, but I was back there in the old days when it was basically hit and miss, the meals. And it is just such a spectacularly run place now. The meals are very nutritious. They're not typical camp food. They are really carefully planned out. They're nutritious. They're healthy. You're in the middle of the woods, so you get a little bit of walking in. We have the study hall where the lectures are given is fully air conditioned. We start off each of the sessions with praise music. Here's the thing for people to do. If you simply go to YouTube and put in Camp Shoshana, that's Shoshana with an H at the end. If you don't put the H, you'll be taken to an Orthodox Jewish camp in New England. It's a totally different group. But Camp Shoshana with an H at the end, look at our praise music videos. This is our praise team. It's the family who leads the music. They're a Jewish family from Montreal. Their picture, in fact, is on the front page of the website that Randall showed. And they lead music. It's a dad and his 2 teenage daughters. They do a fantastic job they have lots of other musicians there. So we sing 2 praise songs, and then we have 55 minutes of the most spectacular Bible teaching. You can ask questions, people schmooze and fellowship between the classes. It's a very relaxing atmosphere. And again, go to the campshoshana.org website that Randall showed. Again, Camp Shoshana is a different website than Ariel. Camp Shoshana is a fan page. Campers put that up. And if you go to the bottom of that website, you'll see 2 wonderful videos at the bottom of the camp. There they are. Camp Shoshana webpage, 2 very nice videos that give you an overview of camp. Just click on those 2 videos and it will give you a sense of camp. And there's photos from previous years.
Yes. And don't forget, you can also go over to ariel.org and also look on there. And there's also a brochure you can download too.
Yes.
So,
the entire program, all the costs, the schedule are all on the ariel.org website. Easy to download.
Yeah. So how many of you in the chat room would love to go? Because I know I would. I think it would be awesome.
It's everything included.
It's
the
everything.
price is about average of what you're going to pay for a vacation.
Mm-hmm.
But typically you are getting like Bible college level instruction. And there are people who actually plan for 5 summers in a row that this is what they're going to do. And so each summer for 5 years, they take all the classes. And at the end of the 5 years, you get a diploma that certifies that you are a graduate of the 5-year program. The value of that is Dr. Fruchtenbaum's reputation. He has such a stellar, high reputation as a Bible scholar in various communities that as people understand that he is the main, of the 5 classes a day, he teaches 3 of them. So typically he will teach 3, I will teach 1, and then we have 1 other teacher. For the adult class, I am sorry, I forgot to mention, there's an entirely separate teen program and an entirely separate children's program with 2 ages.
Cool.
Yes, we have an entirely separate teens program with cool people who run it. That's why they don't have me running it. So cool people run the teen program. Then the children's program is broken down to 2 ages. They've got up to, like age 6 and then from 7 through 12, that sort of thing. It's very well run. It's very safe. Even parents who are very particular feel completely safe at having their kids run all around. Your kids will grow up. They'll get into the woods. They'll be able to go swimming, all in a very safe atmosphere.
Yeah. And there was some interest in the chat room. So if you are serious, go check it out because honestly, if you love Bible News Radio, Ariel is actually what discipled me many years ago and still does, actually. But our time is up. So Mottel, please go ahead, tell everybody where they can get a hold of you if they want. And
sure.
And thank you so much for just being again our teacher and stuff. And I can't wait for you to come back because
happy to do it.
You're my favorite.
Let me end with this one reminder.
Okay.
In 1946, the Nazi war criminals had been tried and they were about to be executed. Just as Haman was hung on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai, in 1946, there was a very evil Nazi doctor by the name of Dr. Albert Streicher. And he was a horrible criminal. He did horrible experiments on people. He was led up the steps of the gallows by the American and British soldiers, and he was going to be hung. And so when he was standing there and they were about to put the noose around his neck, they said, "Dr. Streicher, do you have any last words?" He looked around and he said, "Purim, 1946. It was an unbelievable moment. He understood the role that he had played, that he had just played the role of Haman. He tried to destroy the Jewish people as a Nazi official, and now he was about to be executed by the Allied soldiers for that role. He's standing on the gallows, and a dozen people heard him say, Purim, 1946, and he was executed. So the scripture is not hollow. When God makes a promise, it comes true. And so to understand more of these things, certainly go to the Ariel website, ariel.org, and you can go to my website. I collaborate with Ariel. I'm kind of a volunteer. They can't get rid of me. I'm a volunteer with Ariel. And my website is simply Messiah NJ. You see it there on the screen below my name. And our ministry is locally based here in New Jersey, but I'm happy, Stacy, to be with you today.
Well, the feeling is mutual from one Jew to another, just so you know.
Excellent.
Okay, everybody. Tomorrow we have another guest. She is a doctor and an attorney, all rolled up into one. And she wrote a very fascinating article, and we'll talk about that tomorrow. We'll give you a sneak peek in our email tomorrow. If you sign up for that at BibleNewsRadio.com, you'll learn more about that. But just remember what I always say at the end of every show. Be bold, stand up, and go with God because he loves you. And if today's show hasn't encouraged you to be bold, go back and watch it again and learn more. Get the book of Esther out and read the book. Just read it. It's not that long. And just look for the hand of God in it because it's there. Even though God's name is never mentioned once in that book, you'll actually see that. So we'll see you later, okay? I'll talk to you soon.